Let's start this meeting as we always do in silence, just to go inside ourselves and be with whatever is. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning. So for today's conversation, there's two key areas that I'd love to explore. I don't know if we're going to get them done in a single hour, but the first is around spiritual bypass, and that's particularly prompted because I just, on the way here, driving here, spoke to one of my really dear friends, and she was quite distressed and frustrated. She's been really, really sick. So she's a single mom. She has her son this past week, and she's come down with COVID, and it's really taken her down, like bedridden. And she's like, I just hung up from, a friend of ours, and she was expressing how, she's got to drop him home today, her son, and that what a waste of a week, and how upset she was. And her friend said, well, it's all the divine will, and this is just the universe, showing you something, and, you shouldn't be perturbed about it. And I felt such an ache in my heart for her, because for me, that's one of the definitions of spiritual bypass, where it's an attempt to be helpful, but it's taking a concept and using it to overrun a very human experience. And missing, for me, it's a reactivity instead of a responsiveness, and missing the opportunity for human connection and empathy and understanding. And I know we've discussed it before, and it seems to happen a lot in spiritual communities, or in anyone engaging in self-development and learning, but particularly with these bigger concepts. They're used in a slightly misunderstood way. So I know we've got lots of examples of that, but because that one was so close to me just now, I wanted to start in with that and then lead into a conversation, hopefully, if we get there, around manifestation, which I think is also, there's a big Venn diagram of misunderstanding around what truth and consciousness is doing in regards to individuality that overlays and overlaps spiritual bypass. So can you share your thoughts?
Just give me the exact question you would like to.
Okay, so the exact question would be, when we start to adopt and understand an understanding of non-dualism, why is there the temptation there to suddenly move it into, I'm going to skip over human experience, I'm not going to experience things to their depth and be present to the present moment, which is what the understanding is doing, and instead just go, okay, I'm just going to use this as a methodology to push actually human experience off the table. What's been your experience of that?
Yeah, it's very natural for every human being to want to avoid pain. We're programmed that way. The basic engine room of this separate identity with this idea of personal doership is a desire for pleasure and a fear of pain. And so that separate identity, that ego structure, has become very adept in protecting us, in trying to make our lives easier by all sorts of different strategies and techniques that it uses to avoid the experience of discomfort and pain. But pain is always a call for our attention. I think one of the fundamental understandings of anyone who is engaged in spiritual seeking or meditation is to change the relationship one has inside oneself towards pain. And this in no way means becoming a masochist. It simply means that you begin to understand exactly what I just said, that pain is a call for your attention. So pain starts to function as a friend, as an advisor, as something that alerts you whenever it arises to anything that isn't understood or fully integrated in your own psychology and your own life. Now, of course, I'm not talking about physical pain here. Physical pain is a natural response to when you hurt your body. We're talking here about psychological pain. And so when we bring it back to these concepts that we've been discussing over these weeks, it's natural for that structure, through years and years of habit, again I emphasize, based fundamentally, originally, on a very natural desire on the part of our parents to protect us as we moved into relating with the outside world. But over the years, a certain amount of cleverness and cunningness naturally seeps into the operation of that ego structure. And so when it comes across any concept that can be useful in its primary objective, which is to protect us, that's been its fundamental mission from the days of its original creation. It hasn't been malevolent towards us per se, but in trying to insulate us from the natural processes of living a life, it's become neurotic. And in becoming neurotic, it starts to limit our experiencing and so limit our learning and our growth. So that's all that's really happening in the case of a spiritual bypass, is that the ego, this idea of separation, has simply taken a concept and tried to distort it into something practically useful to prevent us having to suffer pain. And of course that is, as you pointed out in the question, the exact opposite of the fundamental aim of this concept, which is your freedom, your very happiness, your very deepest possible understanding. And as such, it works against that aim. And it's a natural, habitual response of this idea of separation. And any spiritual seeker sincerely interested in their own growth and their own meditation, their own understanding, has to maintain a vigilance around it and to be careful that he or she is not falling into the trap of using a spiritual concept designed to lead you towards self-realization in an inverted way, to actually limit that understanding, to limit that growth by conveniently cutting yourself off from one of the main ways we learn in having a human body and having a human experience, which is through difficulty, through pain.
I think it's one of the key things that turns people away, ironically, from this, when you witness a lot of, I'm going to keep using the word spiritual bypass because it's convenient, but when you see people do it, you think, oh, that's taking me, I don't want to engage with that line of thinking because it's going to take me away from my aliveness and my humanity. And I think it's important to discuss that it does actually, realization brings about an aliveness and more energy and more flow and more feeling. It doesn't actually deaden and numb it. Can you describe your experience with that? Because I haven't witnessed a numbing too. If anything, you're hawkeyeing constantly and coming closer into human experience.
Yeah. It was one of my fears, actually, when I first came into contact with Advaita. And what I was afraid of was that there seemed to be a direction of travel within the concepts of Advaita that would inevitably lead me away from my passion, away from my humanity, away from what I cared about, away from my aliveness. And I actually put it to my teacher, Ramesh Balsekar, and I said, I'm concerned that this, the more I understand and go into the concepts that you're sharing, I'm concerned that it will actually take away my aliveness, take away my feeling, my passion. And he looked at me with great compassion. He said, no, it's exactly the opposite. It actually intensifies and deepens the range of experience and feeling and engagement that is possible for a separate body-mind organism in this manifestation. And that has exactly been my experience. Now, there is and can be a transition. Our nervous system is very used to what I would call the emotional sugar rush, that we've become used to veering between extremes of high and low. And when we're not living that kind of elevated, overstimulated emotional existence, we start to become concerned that we're not really alive, that we're not getting the most out of this opportunity of being human. But if you really look at most people and the way they live, it's a very neurotic existence, because it goes between incredible highs sometimes and incredible lows, and it leaves very little space and room for a settledness to become rooted in your daily life, in the way you experience yourself. And it's only that settledness that will provide you with fulfillment and a happiness that actually lasts. That settledness doesn't mean to say that on its surface there still isn't a huge range of experiencing and feeling that is going on. And because of that settledness, the actual experience of that feeling deepens, it heightens, because there is a space for you to not only be experiencing it, but to see yourself experiencing it too. So it actually deepens the opportunity of being human. And I think the other thing to make a note of with this topic of spiritual bypassing is to actually look at it from a different perspective. The examples that you brought up, and an example I can give, I had a friend who went to see my teacher and listened to his concepts for 3 days, and was not able to sincerely and honestly accept them, because just before he went down there, he'd been involved in a very painful separation from his partner. And in listening to the concepts, he realized that it would be so convenient and easy for him simply to take those concepts on board on an intellectual level, and thereby avoid having to go through all of the pain and suffering that was coming up in the face of this separation that had just taken place. Now that is an example of where the concept can go into spiritual bypassing, or where the integrity and honesty of the watchfulness of the seeker can prevent that from happening. And so it's a very delicate, but in no way impossible situation that people can be faced with. But I just want to draw your attention to another aspect of it, because the suggestion sometimes from a psychological perspective, when faced with a spiritual concept, is that from a psychological point of view, there is a bypass going on. And as I pointed out, that can indeed be true, but it isn't fundamentally true. And what is fundamentally true is exactly the opposite of that. That what can also happen is the remnants of the psychological egoic structure can listen to these concepts that point towards freedom and the dissolution of that psychological separate ego structure, and by using this argument, bypass the very point of their own freedom. They can bypass the possibility of their egoic disappearance and dissolution by clinging on to a psychological reality because of the fear that that disappearance and that potential dissolution brings up within the ego structure. So from that perspective, the bypass can be seen as actually taking place from the point of view of the egoic structure that doesn't want to disappear, that doesn't want to move into emptiness, which will be the final experience of freedom within a human body mind. So it's a subtle area, and all that I can suggest is awareness, vigilance, help from your friends if they happen to feel that you are moving away from a painful experience by using a concept can sometimes be more easily pointed out by someone who cares for you. But also not to make the mistake that that argument simply becomes an argument against your own eventual disappearance, that it becomes some support for the continued existence of a separate identity with an idea of personal doership. Both can be there.
I think that's been the most interesting thing for me, is when you said to me a couple of years ago, just be unbelievably attentive to your ego structures because they can shrink right down to the size of a pinhead and feel like they've gone, and then they'll just extrapolate back up and out again. And it's something, having witnessed that happen with so many spiritual teachers, where you're like, yeah, you know, you can feel it, they're in it, and then there's a shift, a huge shift, because perhaps the attentiveness within themselves has been lost. Have you seen that for yourself with varying?
I can give the example from my own life. When I was up in the Himalayas, and I'd been doing a lot of silent sitting. And if you do a lot of silent sitting, you become very good at it. And what I mean when I say good at it is a certain skill, a certain capacity develops inside of you where you can spend hours inside of yourself watching everything, seeing everything as it arises, as it happens, not missing a single thing, not having your mind take you away from that watcher for even a microsecond. And it's a very beautiful experience of just staying so present. But it was during one sit where suddenly this deeper and really transformative insight landed inside of me, when suddenly this question came up: who is seeing this wonderful undisturbed capacity of watching? Who is seeing that? And at that moment I realized that the remnants of the egoic separation had taken an even subtler step back into another more sophisticated idea that allowed me to still cling to a sense of separation with individual personal doership. And the ego's not fussy where it lands up. It can exist on the size of a pinhead and still feel like it's doing its job. But it's only when you start to move back into that place that can't be seen any longer, but can only be a space of being. It's only then, when you've gone to the place where the eyes cannot see themselves, that you start to get to the very depth of meditation and the depth of truth and freedom. One
of my students really beautifully put it the other day, and she said, oh God, she's like, I think I've fallen into like a booby trap. And I said, what's going on? She goes, I've become really proud of being able to be the witness and congratulating myself. I'm like, yeah, look at you witnessing yourself move through the world. And she's like, there's been this like shininess to it or a gleam to it. And she said, and then as soon as she saw it, she felt it collapse. And I was like, oh, that's it's an important sequence to become aware of the bigger picture of what also is happening, of what the ego structures are doing. She's like, it felt like it sort of slid in like a mist and then took over.
But also, what I'd like to add there is don't not enjoy these moments. The spiritual path is a journey. It has to take place on some level over time. And it's a hard path in many respects and a painful path, as we've spoken about before. So when there is a certain sense of change, a certain sense of greater capacity that you see inside yourself, enjoy it, but just don't stop. What I often say is, use Buddha's words, chariveti, which means keep going, keep going. So don't not enjoy these moments of insight and recognition, because they will give you strength, they will give you renewed energy to keep going. Just don't stop.
I think that's a really important point, because the irony of the changing faces of the ego structures, because I was heavily involved in spiritual bypass. I was in a community where that was our religion, and once I started to see it for what it was, I went into a huge state of collapse and shame and guilt, and then it was my ego structures which had been so heavily engaged in it then punished me for it afterwards. And it was a pretty brutal experience, and it lasted years. I would keep ruminating and reminiscing on, oh God, I can't believe I did that, and it was so unhelpful. It took me a long time to clear that out, to be able to move back into a space of expansion, and I found it interesting, on reflection, years later, I found it interesting that the ego took the material that it had created to then drive it in and punish me further. And so I think that kindness to self and knowing that it's all grist for the mill or fuel for the fire is so, so important. Have you ever plateaued out like that? Had moments of where you start to be able to see that ego, the way the ego works, but then it uses that to work on you, like those moments of despair?
You're saying it uses it on you in a positive way or a negative way?
In a negative way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the psychological term for that is the superego.
Yeah.
It's that part of the ego that again, fundamentally operating according to its original programming, which was to protect you. But in trying to protect you, it ends up berating you for being stupid in whatever way you've missed in some way. And it's very painful. But again, within its own reality, understandable. It's just another element of like, my job is to keep you safe, so you should never do this again. And so you have to suffer the slings and arrows of the superego at some point. But it's something to simply watch and not get caught in. It's just the operation of this mechanism that has been implanted in you, and it will be there for as long as it needs to be, and then one day it will be gone.
Can we, based on that, actually give this some colour? One of my friends was listening to the first and the second talk and said, look, I'm really confused about when you're saying ego and ego structure, and he said, I just view the ego as vanity and therefore something to be like gotten rid of. And can you then describe, when you're just saying ego structure, superego, can you give some context to that for someone that's going, hang on a sec, I thought this was about me losing weight and not being concerned with that?
Yeah, the way your friend is using ego is more in the colloquial sense that basically, he's got a huge ego. It means someone maybe is as a tendency towards narcissism. I'm not using it in that way. I use interchangeable descriptions for this sense of separation. So for me, the ego, the egoic structure, is another way of talking about this sense of a separate identity, of a separate person with individual personal doership. And it's that belief, it's that concept that all of these talks are aimed at, to fundamentally question and see the falsity of that belief from whatever angle you can come at it at. And over these talks, I've given various ways that people can approach that.
Beautiful. Can we talk about, and I just want to put a little bit of meat on the bones in regards, because I know you're not on social media, there is a huge, particularly in the last 5 years, uprising around manifestation. So there's now manifestation coaches and manifestation leaders and manifestation mentors, and in essence, where I feel like there's a power in the concept of being very clear on what it is that you'd like and being able to be attentive to that. Where I feel the distortion has happened is it's this belief that if you focus and concentrate hard enough on something that you want in your life, it therefore will be yours. And the downside of that, for me, is this huge, what I've seen in people is a huge sense of collapse, where they feel that they haven't done it correctly. They feel that they're not worthy or good enough in order to... So wrapped up, first of all, as a sidebar, in manifestation is all around self-worth, which I think is valid. So therefore, if they haven't been able to manifest the thing that they wanted, that they feel that they haven't done the work. You know, there's a lot of terminology around this, doing the work. And they have a real sense of defeat and disillusionment. And what concerns me is more of a sense of personal doership, more of a sense of I've done it wrong, I'm unable to manifest these things. So can you share through your lens thoughts on manifestation and what's happening with personal doership in regards to that?
Yeah. Let's just make a distinction between the way I normally use the word manifestation. I use the word manifestation to describe where we find ourselves, the world, this dreamscape that we wake up to each morning and lose completely in deep sleep every 24 hours. That's how I use the word manifestation. What you're talking about, I understand, is a different thing altogether. My first question to anyone engaged in that is, who is doing the manifesting? Who is this person? And if you don't know the answer to that, then I would say that's the fundamental flaw that needs to be corrected. You have to understand who it is that wants whatever it is that is being attempted to be manifested, and then understand what is the engine room behind this desire for whatever is wanted. If you start to inquire, if you start to go into what that identity is, you will come very quickly to, again, this belief in a separate identity with individual personal doership. And of course, if someone says to you, you have that power to manifest whatever you want, all that does is give tremendous fuel to this idea of separation, because it starts to offer or to dangle the possibility of complete control over your life. Now, the question is, why do you want control of your life? What is it about the way your life is happening that is not satisfying for you? And the first thing that will come up in answering that question is, again, the engine room of the ego. I want more pleasure and I fear more pain. That is the fundamental engine room of the idea of separation. But anyone looking honestly at their life, including someone involved in these ideas of being able to manifest whatever they want, if they're sincere and honest, will always have to acknowledge that sometimes what they want happens and sometimes it doesn't. There is no human being that I know of, have read about, or have ever met, or anticipate ever meeting, who is being honest and sincere about the actual observation of their own personal life, who could ever say that everything they ever wanted happened. It's just not the case here. It's unrealistic. And on top of that, what would be the result of everything you wanted happening? Because what is the basis of your desire and the basis of your fear? The basis of your desire and fear are your past experiences. Basically, you plan to try and avoid the causes of pain that you know have happened before, and to promote or encourage the pleasure and the way the pleasure has happened before. That's all you can do. You can only try and manifest a future in your life based on a past that's already been lived. Mm-hmm. So inevitably any manifester will be dealing with a very reduced possible horizon. It will start to actually limit the possibilities of their life according to what they've already lived. So the chances of a repetitive cycle building up are increased every single time you do it. Now, of course, there may be some egoic satisfaction in you going through some mental process of manifestation, and by chance, and I emphasize by chance, it happening. Sometimes what we want does happen. But for us to take credit for that on an egoic level is simply not looking carefully enough at the reality. It's simply ignoring the times or belittling the times when actually it didn't work, when what we wanted didn't happen. So this idea of manifestation risks actually making your life more impoverished, less rich, less deep, because of this inevitability of repeating whatever worked for you before. And in that repetition, the other tremendous cost of this idea of being able to manifest your future is you start to deprive yourself of what actually you love about being human, about being alive, which is the not knowing, which is the mystery, which is the wonder of this experience, this magical experience of having an identification with a separate body-mind, bringing you things you could never have dreamed of. That's the very stuff of beauty, of love, of passion, of all of the things that you care about, that you value. And if you can just simply wrap those up in a rather simplistic idea of I can get whatever I want, what is the cost of that? I give you an example from a book I studied when I was at university, and many people will know it as Dangerous Liaisons. I don't know if you've either seen the movie or read the book. Its original title in French is Les Liaisons Dangereuses. And it's about these two middle-aged, a man and a woman, from, the French aristocracy back in the 18th century, who have had many experiences in the world of romance, in the world of relationship and love. And they've become very cynical, but very adept at making other people fall in love with them. And they've developed, and the novel goes into the conversations, the meetings they have, the discussions they have. They've developed these various techniques to fool other people, to start to play with other people's emotions, and to draw them into a romantic love affair that they themselves are not involved in, that they themselves remain in control of. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of the book, the lesson of the novel comes at the end when these two people, in trying to control their emotional lives in a way that suits them, end up destroying each other and destroying the very possibility of the miracle of falling in love through that control. And that control has only been stimulated by previous hurt, by previous failure, by previous maybe humiliation or lack of success within the world of human relationships. But that's part of being human. Part of being human is to fail. Part of being human is to suffer, to feel pain. And it's only through those failures, it's that pain that gives the greatest platform for change, for learning, for deep, deep understanding and insight. When we're happy, there's no reason to look for anything. It's only in the face of difficulty that the stimulation is there, that call for our attention is there, that leads to a deepening of our experience here, of this opportunity of being identified with a separate body-mind.
Do you think there's such an upswell at the moment, because it's gathering speed, of this concept of manifestation, which is literally write a list of things you want in your journal and focus on getting them and see the signs, and this huge, taking credit for when it goes well, and also then being beaten with your own stick about when it doesn't. You weren't able, or capable is the word that's used a lot. Oh, you weren't capable of manifesting that, but try harder. So further, strengthening this idea of the ego structure and individuality. When you were talking about this is a moving away from pain and a losing of the mystery and the awe, this sense of personal doership and credibility in doing it. Do you think that there's an uprising of manifestation at the moment because the world feels, I think it's always felt uncertain, but there's so much talk, particularly since the pandemic, of this uncertainty. So therefore it's like, okay, well, I'll cling in, I'll push in to what I can control, because there's so much talk about uncertainty as well. Since late 2019, this has been the language of the mainstream media, and social media is like, oh God, the world's so uncertain now, and we're so at risk and in a state of flux. Is there the antidote in society as a whole to dig in deeper and to try to control more? What do you think's happening there in consciousness?
The basic fact of the human condition is this body-mind is going to die. Mm-hmm. That's never changed. If we limit our reality to our body-mind, we are inevitably going to be in some sort of fear and anguish. And that has been the case for human beings forever. And yes, the context, a particular chronological context may bring up a particular packaging on the outside that may intensify a focus on I need to control, may bring up more fear because of potential world war or the pandemic or whatever it is. But this is not new. This has been going on as long as human beings have been going on. So that is the call for your attention. The call for your attention is you're not going to be here forever. You know that. Every human being knows that. Is there something beyond that that doesn't change? That is the quest of any spiritual search. What is it in my reality that is always there? And it is possible through spiritual seeking, through inquiry, through meditation, to actually experience that inside of you which never dies. When you put the temporary benefits that you may receive from any idea of you have done something, it pales in comparison. That is such a small crumb of satisfaction compared with the possibility of you understanding the deepest reality within you. So, for anyone who's involved, sincerely involved in playing with these ideas of manifesting in their own life, I would say, as I would say with anything that anyone's involved in, continue as much as you feel drawn to it. That does constitute part of your destiny at the moment. Continue to do whatever it is you want to do, the next most obvious thing to do, but just add these ingredients of awareness and watchfulness. Don't become sloppy in the way you actually assess the benefits of what you're engaged in your daily life. Don't become inobservant in terms of what is actually going on in your daily life, because there is so much more than that. You are choosing a very limited experience in terms of being human by clinging on to an idea of separation and an idea of separate personal doership.
And an idea of being a separate person and doership that also brings with it an extra layer of pain, like we were describing, in that I didn't get to get the thing that I wanted, or, you know, I want a lover and I want a house and I'll journal about them and therefore they're not coming my way, therefore it's a me problem, I think is the trickiest part. It just further drives it in.
From my perspective, that's hope. Because it's actually failure is another very, very unrecognized beauty in human life. I mean, I remember sitting one day with a very dear friend, and we were talking. It was in a small group of people, and we were talking about death. So the conversation had become very focused, because whenever you bring death into it, it focuses people's minds very well. And this beautiful friend of mine suddenly, we'd shared, and this beautiful friend of mine suddenly, it was his turn to speak, and he said, when I look at my life, I see that it's been a failure. And it touched me so much when he said that, because what I saw in looking at him and the beauty of him was a complete success. Was that very humility, that very surrender, that very acceptance that he wasn't in control, that there was something bigger than him that had dictated his life. That was the true success behind him having the courage to say, I'm a failure. And that is something that is, for me, much more real, much more beautiful than any temporary sugar rush of, oh look, I was lucky enough to think something that I wanted, and it happened. And again, I'm not saying stop. I'm not saying don't engage in trying to manifest your life. Go for it. It's a part of your experiencing of being human. Just remain observant. Just remain honest and truthful in the way you look at yourself and the results in your daily life, the actual fulfillment and happiness you feel. And if it's working for you, great. And if you find that it's not, then it's an opportunity to look a little deeper.
And I know you and I both feel that meditation as a daily practice helps create the spaciousness in order to do that, to be able to see. Can you talk a little more about the cost of rushing? When we rush day to day, and the perception of everything that we've just been, the cost to the perception of everything we've just discussed?
I said, I think before, truth is very quiet. Inside of you, you are animated by what everyone is animated by, and that is consciousness. And that is your connection to God. That is, in essence, God, or the truth, the absolute. That is the bridge between you and your ultimate reality. And that will never push you. The cause of you actually being alive, but it will never push you. It will deliver hints through your intuition, through the events that come to your door according to your destiny, giving you opportunities to inquire, to look, to feel when you come up against pain, to inquire why that's happening. It will provide this as part of your destiny, but it will never push you. It will wait for you to turn towards that truth, that origin inside yourself. So the benefit of silence, of stillness, of meditation, and the cost of busyness, of rushing, of stress, of noise, is, on the one hand, the silence most closely resonates with your home, with where we all emerged from. And the noise, the rushing, the stress makes that resonance much, much more difficult to sense, to feel, to hear, to be aware of. And if you are unable to create a space in your daily life that allows you to drop back into nothing, just the simplicity of here now, just to quiet yourself and be in whatever stillness surrounds you. And that doesn't mean it has to be complete, perfect silence. Stillness is a space inside of you that is untouched by any noise. So even in the midst of a incredibly busy city like Bombay, it's possible, by going inside yourself, to find that place of settledness, of stillness inside yourself. And in landing there, in spending time there, if you do it regularly enough, then you give the opportunity of this connection, this alive connection, this dialogue between the witness and your origins to start meeting, to start infusing each other with a different reality, the reality. And that will start to filter through into the way you live your daily life. And you'll start to see the benefits from that.
I think the beautiful thing that I notice with students is that they start to, in the beginning it's just sitting, it's challenging enough, but then they start to look at how they get into the chair and how they get out of the chair. And then it has a resonance that then starts to, once they've had that taste of it, even if it's fleeting, then other things start to they seem uncomfortable and gritty by comparison, and that just grows and grows. And also I want to highlight for anyone listening around meditation, the very, very common moment where frustration with there's no end goal. One of my students so beautifully put the other day, he's like, God, it's really irritating, this meditation, isn't it? And I said, what? And he was saying it with such love. And he said, unlike everything in my life where I can go, okay, I've finished that, I've completed that, that's been achieved, or I can really note my progress or get any kind of like solid external feedback on like a project. He's like, this sits in the subtle realms and so deeply that the grotesque obviousness of everything else, and my addiction to it is becoming more and more obvious. And I said, that's so beautifully put, because I think we launch into meditation, and it's like, oh, when am I going to get a gold star, or when am I, when will I really see the benefit? But it's so slow and subtle that we're evolving with it, that it's usually only after years of looking back that we see it. It's something that's come up this past week a lot, I think, with people around meditation. You've been meditating for decades. What have been your promises and your pitfalls, and anything that someone starting in meditation should keep a close eye on?
I think one of the paradoxes of this idea of separation of the ego is it's set up to want things and to feel the pleasure of getting them when it succeeds in being aligned with the universe, and that does happen. But actually, it can only ever really fully experience satisfaction when it itself is dissolved back into something bigger. So, in the same way that the eyes can't see themselves, meditation will never be something that you can hold in your hand. It's always going to be something bigger than you. And there are devices and techniques that allow you to enter through doorways into that space of interiority. There are techniques that have been devised over many thousands of years that help towards that. But in the end, the deepest experience, the only experience that will ever satisfy you, is an experience that is beyond you. If you can hold it in your hand, it'll never overwhelm you. It'll always still remain something within your power. And what you're actually longing for is a let go into something bigger by far than your separation could ever be. And that siren call is the call of home, is the call of where we all emerged from. That huge silence from which we emerged. So it's natural for the mind, for the structure, to want to grab hold of experience within a spiritual journey. And there's, again, nothing wrong with it. The same way that there's nothing wrong in a person engaging in the playfulness, as I would see it, of trying to manifest what you want in your life. It's fine. If it's your end point, I would not feel so content with it. But as something that you experience and play with along the way, there's not a problem. And in the same way, it's completely natural that anyone engaged in such an elusive and amorphous experience of meditation would like to be able to have some way of measuring their progress, of understanding if they were going in the right direction. And there definitely are signposts that will indicate whether you are in that right direction of travel. So there's nothing wrong with enjoying whatever comes up when you go inside yourself, when you go inside your own interiority. Just don't get caught on it. Experience it, enjoy it, and let it go. Anything that you can hold on to in the end will become something of a burden. It will be an unnecessary backpack that you're carrying on a journey that requires your lightness. So enjoy everything that happens. Don't miss anything that happens. Just don't make a story out of it. Just enjoy it, see it, and then let it go. And don't be worried about its return. In meditation, you are not looking for repetition. You're looking for truth. And truth in and of itself is always on the move. It's always changing. Not its fundamental reality, but the way it can express, the way it can be seen, the way it can be felt, the way it can be experienced. So don't get fixed anywhere. Just keep watching. Just keep coming back inside and seeing what you see. And there is a growing subtlety that anyone who spends significant amount of time meditating or inside themselves will start to see. And again, it's very quiet. It doesn't come in, it can come with great bangs and whistles, but actually the deeper change is very, very quiet and very subtle. And it almost requires, it feels almost like you're developing a different organ within your ability to see, to experience, to incorporate a deeper level of being alive, a deeper level of experiencing. And that is beautiful in itself, unimaginably beautiful in itself, and yet so, so simple. It doesn't come wrapped in the colours that we've grown accustomed to when something wonderful lands at our door. It slides in unexpected, but it brings a peace, a settledness, a love, a beauty that is unimaginable.
And prior to that, have you had your struggles with meditation? Have you had your struggles?
I don't know any human being who's been involved in meditation who doesn't have to go through struggle. And what is the struggle, basically? The struggle is disentangling yourself from this habit of separation, of seeing yourself that way, and the habit of the brain and the heart and the grooves that the mental and the emotional experiencing has become stuck in. So as you move inside yourself, it's bound to involve a friction, a certain friction. And that friction, again, like pain before it, isn't something to shy away from, even though it can be very uncomfortable, because it's in that friction that things get burnt away. It's in that friction that those rough edges of separation start to smooth over until one day they're just gone.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you too, Jack. It was a lovely session. As always, we'll end in the silence that we began with, just as a way for people to return to themselves after this meeting and just drop back inside and be in the deepest possible place they can find with whatever is.